Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome. My name is Amira. I'm so happy to have you here, and today we are going to dive in some of my favorite top takeaways from my top 5 favorite books I have read over the past year. And before we get started, if you haven't already, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel and like this video if there's anything that you've enjoyed. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I really wanted to create this video because something that I've noticed about myself is that when I stop reading, I tend to go back into kind of bad habits. Maybe I'm a little bit more lazy, maybe I'm not as motivated, maybe I'm not as much of a self-starter as I am when I'm reading books and really engaging with that content that I need to stay inspired and to stay motivated. So I really wanted to make this video because these are some of the 5 books that I've read that really inspired me in some kind of way, or I learned something new. And I really encourage you to also just read. If you don't have a lot of time to sit down and read, you can even take on audiobooks. There's a ton of audiobooks on Audible, and there's also a ton of audiobooks for free on YouTube. And I tend to read self-help books. I don't really spend a lot of time reading fictional books. I've read a few, but not nearly as many as I'll read autobiographies and self-help books. I feel like those really inspire me to continue on the journey that I want to continue on, which is a journey of freedom, self-discovery, and self-love and compassion, and just a deeper understanding of myself and the world. My first book is... So I know the title is a little harsh, it's a little brash, but it's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a by Mark Manson. And I used to see people reading this one on the plane all the time, so I'm kind of late on the bandwagon of reading this book, but I actually bought this book for my husband this year as an anniversary gift, along with some other things that I knew that he needed. The funny part is I'm actually the one reading it right now. You know, when you buy those gifts that it's like, oh, I kind of want to use this, I'll borrow it real quick. That's kind of how this gift is. So I'm actually almost done with it, so then he will actually get started on reading it pretty soon. I have about 15 pages left, but I think overall I've gotten a really good, solid understanding of his points that he's making. And so my biggest takeaway from this book is to stop avoiding failures. A lot of times we've grown up in this kind of self-concept that we just need to be perfect, or we're scared to make mistakes, we're scared to fail, especially publicly, right? Everybody's watching, and there's like that fear of failure, there's that fear of embarrassment. And honestly, he explains that improvement at anything is usually the result of 1,000 tiny failures, or what we perceive as failures, right? So it's honestly something that we shouldn't be avoiding, because your success is on the opposite side of making those mistakes, making those failures. And who cares if it's embarrassing or if someone watches you making these failures or mistakes? We all should be constantly trying to grow and constantly trying to improve. Therefore, we will all make mistakes. We always hear the same example of like when a baby is learning how to walk, they're not just gonna go from crawling to standing and walking on the first try, right? They're gonna fall several times, and they're gonna be wobbly, and they're gonna keep going, and they're going to eventually start walking, right? That's pretty much what happens to all children as they start to grow up, right? We all had to just constantly keep trying. And imagine if that baby just tried to walk once, failed, fell on their bottom, and then they just gave up after that. That wouldn't make any sense, right? It's the sum of those tiny failures or mistakes that actually allows us to reach that said goal. Oh, another takeaway that I had from this book that I really loved is that when you solve problems, that is what creates happiness. So whenever you look back and start to self-reflect and look over your life, you may start to realize that the most meaningful moments of your life were the ones that were the most stressful or challenging, because it's after you conquer those challenges where you reached your success. So it's actually in those moments where you're working towards something and you're challenging yourself, and you might put yourself through it a little bit, right? But it's on the other side where you grow and you flourish and you become an even more beautiful version of yourself. And looking back, you're gonna appreciate those moments that you went through, that challenge, because once you conquered onto the other side, you saw how strong and how resilient you really are and how capable you really are. And these books are in no particular order. This is just how I wrote them. But number 2, I actually listened to as an audio book, and it was Will Smith's autobiography titled Will. And I loved this book. I think a big portion of why I loved it is because, I'm a fan of Will Smith. We won't even address the elephant in the room because I read this book way before that. But I've always been a fan of his, and I've always felt like I've known a lot of his story, but you still get so much more out of his story, and he reveals so much about himself and so much insight over his life. And the great part about the audio book is that it's actually him reading his story. And so it's just so easy to get entangled. So easy to get entangled in his life story and his life's work so far. And one of my biggest takeaways kind of goes back to my first book that I just shared, is this is a person that's literally made so many tiny failures, so many tiny mistakes, but has reached massive levels of success in his own version and his own definition of success. And I just appreciated seeing his journey and how he went from just this kid in Philadelphia to this big superstar, and the mental game that it takes to even get to that level. And one of my favorite takeaways from his book was actually the story that he shared of how Fresh Prince of Bel-Air came to life. And I won't go too deep into the story, but basically he was at Quincy Jones's house, and he's young, like probably 19, 20, maybe 21, or younger. He's at Quincy Jones's house. Quincy Jones has a bunch of executives, and they're trying to pitch this TV show. Will Smith did not know that Quincy Jones was trying to pitch this TV show that centered around him to these execs. He found out there at Quincy Jones's house, like, oh guys, we have this great show, it's this concept, and it's like this and this and this. And he basically just suggests to Will, like, hey, I need you to pitch this show now. And Will's like, now? I'm not ready to pitch this show now. I don't even know the lines. I haven't rehearsed anything. I haven't memorized anything. And Quincy Jones is like, it's pretty much either now or it may never happen. Everybody that needs to greenlight this idea and this concept and bring it to life is here in this house now. Are you gonna do it, or are you just gonna pass on the opportunity? And after some thought, Will took 10 minutes to himself to prepare. Of course, he tells this story way better than me, by the way. He took 10 minutes to prepare, and he pretty much just winged it, and the show became what we all know and a lot of us love. It's one of my favorite shows, personally. And I just thought that was such a great story of being courageous, facing your fears, and not being afraid to fail and trying. A lot of times our success is rooted in action. So that was one of my favorite and most memorable stories that he shared from his book. And I highly recommend it. I highly recommend the audiobook. Okay, so number 3, again, in no particular order. Number 3 is this book, The Courage to Be Disliked. So in The Courage to Be Disliked, there's a lot of great takeaways, but one of my biggest takeaways is that a lot of times we use our past trauma, our past experiences, our past, anything that's happened, and we use that as a way to explain why we are the way we are now and why our future is going to be X way, right? So, well, I'm this way because this happened to me, instead of acknowledging, like, okay, those things are valid. Those things did happen to me. They are true. But asking yourself in a moment of reflection, okay, so now what? Those things did happen. That is true. And now what? What am I gonna do? Am I gonna stay here and just hold on to that excuse and stay the same? Or am I going to acknowledge that those things did happen and move forward so that I can progress towards the person that I want to be and towards the person that I'm meant to be? But the theme of this book is what? Courage, right? So the path of self-acceptance is rooted in courage. You have to have the courage to make the decision to go towards the path that is your greater self, to go towards the path of the life that you know you want and the life that you know you deserve. But you have to find the courage to do that. And you have to find the courage every single day to make the steps that you need to get there. Okay, so number 4 is a book that I actually mentioned in my last video. And it is Set Boundaries and Find Peace. A guide to reclaiming yourself. So something I've noticed about myself is that I have a people-pleasing tendency, and I tend to maybe keep my thoughts to myself and not say what I really want to say to avoid confrontation or what I perceive as confrontation. Sometimes when you're just speaking up for yourself, I have to get that out of my head that it's considered confrontational. And I'm not necessarily hurting someone else's feelings. All I'm doing is validating how I feel and voicing and speaking up for myself. So in this book, it revealed to me some of the necessary tools that I need so that I can feel heard and I can voice my opinion and what I'm thinking by setting those boundaries, and they're usually rooted in a baseline that's respectful, right? So I can use these tools with people that are either friends, family, or even coworkers. And I find it super necessary to be able to find your voice and use these tools to set those boundaries, because ultimately, like the title says, you find your peace. And last but not least, one of my favorite books of this year that I've read was The 4 Agreements. The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, a practical guide to personal freedom. And as you see, a lot of these books are on my iPad. I actually only have one physical copy of a book and a few audiobooks. So I just suggest however you like to read books, just do whatever it takes to read the book. This book, as titled, has 4 agreements that allow you to reach that personal freedom, which is what we all want, especially what I want. And that's what I think the theme of my channel is, freedom. And one of the 4 agreements is to not take things personally. I have had a habit of taking things personally, and this book really allowed me to understand that other people's actions are a reflection of that person. And it freed me because I can now understand that it has nothing to do with me, and it frees me and frees all of us from the suffering that typically results when we place other people's responsibilities onto us and other people's actions onto us. So, for example, let's say I just made a really kind gesture to another person. I held the door open for them, something simple as that. Typically, my expectations are that that person will say thank you. Oh, thank you. Easy, right? But sometimes some people are so caught up in their own world that they might not even have realized it and they didn't say thank you. But that should not affect me and make me feel like, ugh, right? It's just a reflection of them. Maybe they don't say thank you. Maybe they don't appreciate it, or maybe they're just in their own world that they're not even thinking about it, right? But regardless of the reasoning behind it, it has nothing to do with me. So it should not change or affect how I think, how I feel, or change my actions, right? I will still keep moving throughout the world, opening doors for people and saying thank you and being kind, because my kindness is not linked to someone else's appreciation or their expression of gratitude. My kindness is linked to my heart and how I want to treat others. And I will no longer look for other people to respond in a certain type of way and get affected by it. I kind of felt this a little bit working in customer service. You do all these nice things for people and they still complain, they still moan, they still groan, they don't say thank you. And that used to really take a toll on me as a person that just really appreciates common courtesy. But after reading this book, I realized that their actions are not tied to me at all. So I can just release myself from the actions of others and just take the actions of myself and be accountable for those only. And I know that's a very simple example, but sometimes those simple examples are the way that we can just draw the bigger picture here. Fundamentally, remember that you're responsible for your thoughts, feelings, and actions, not responsible for anybody else's. And overall, the theme that I found that weaved its way through every book that I just covered is self-responsibility and self-accountability. So when we take responsibility for our thoughts, our actions, and our feelings, it results in a better world for all of us that we're cultivating. And of course, this doesn't mean that we're not here to help each other, because we are. We're here to share our gifts. But it's important to note that it is not our job to place other people's responsibilities onto us, and it's also not our job or fair to place our responsibilities onto others. My wish is for you to have compassion with yourself while you work towards this journey of self-healing, compassion, love, and discovery, and finding your own personal freedom and finding your own voice. It will not always be easy and it will not always be pretty, but I believe in you, I believe in me, and I believe that we will continue to cultivate the best life that we can for ourselves and for others around us. I love you guys, and I thank you so much for making it towards the end of this video. If there's anything at all that you've enjoyed, please like this video because it does help my channel grow. Also, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and comment below your favorite book that you have read this year. I would love to add it to my 2023 list of books to read. And as always, I love you guys. I thank you so much for your time. I will see you on the next one.